The owner of a failing restaurant let a homeless mother and son stay while it was for sale. Days later, when she entered without knocking, she was paralyzed by unbelievable what the woman could do. Sarah Matthews stood frozen at the kitchen door of her restaurant, Sweet Haven, her hand trembling on the light switch. At nearly midnight, there shouldn't have been any sounds coming from inside, yet she clearly heard pots clanging and smelled something cooking. Her heart raced as she peered through the small window. A woman she'd never seen before was moving confidently around her kitchen, stirring pots and checking ovens as if she owned the place. The stranger was thin, probably in her mid-30s, with long dark hair tied back messily. "Hey!" Sarah burst through the door, making the woman jump. "What do you think you're doing in my kitchen?" The intruder spun around, nearly dropping the pan she was holding. I can explain," she stammered, backing away slowly. "You'd better explain fast before I call the police," Sarah threatened, reaching for her phone. Her fingers brushed against the hospital bracelet still on her wrist, a reminder of the devastating news she'd received just hours ago. "Please," the woman begged. "I'm not stealing anything. I was just—" She gestured to the stove where several pots were simmering. "The food was going to be thrown out anyway. I saw the prep cooks disposing of perfectly good ingredients earlier." Sarah moved closer, her anger mixing with curiosity as she noticed the professional way the woman had organized her cooking station. Something about her technique seemed familiar. "You're not just some random person looking for food, are you?" Sarah asked, studying the perfectly brunoiseed vegetables and the proper way the woman held her knife. "You've worked in kitchens before." The woman's shoulders slumped. "My name is Grace Henderson, and yes, I used to be a chef." She wiped her hands on her worn jacket. "A real one, with my own restaurant in New York. But that was another life." Before Sarah could respond, a small voice called out from the dining room. "Mom, are you okay?" A boy, no more than 8 years old, appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a threadbare blanket. His eyes were wide with fear. "Tommy, I told you to stay hidden," Grace said softly, moving to shield him. Sarah's anger deflated as she looked at the boy's thin face and Grace's protective stance. "How long have you been sneaking in here?" "Just 3 nights," Grace admitted. We don't have anywhere else to go. I'm not proud of breaking in, but Tommy needs to eat." Sarah should have called the police. It was the sensible thing to do. But something about Grace's dignified bearing, despite her obvious hardship and the way she'd handled herself in the kitchen, made Sarah hesitate. "Show me what you were cooking," Sarah said finally. Grace blinked in surprise, but quickly moved to the stove. "I was making a mushroom risotto with the leftover arborio rice and some vegetables that were going to be thrown out." And here, she lifted a pot lid, releasing a heavenly aroma. A classic French onion soup using day-old bread and onions past their prime. Sarah tasted the risotto. It was perfect, creamy, with just the right amount of bite to the rice and a depth of flavor that spoke of years of experience. 2 weeks ago, Sarah found herself saying, "If you had asked me if I'd ever let strangers cook in my kitchen after hours, I would have said you were crazy." But 2 weeks ago, everything was different. 2 weeks earlier. Sarah sat in Dr. Miller's office, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The words early-stage breast cancer hung heavy in the air. Her mother had died from the same disease 5 years ago. "We need to start treatment immediately," Dr. Miller said, reviewing the test results. "The good news is we caught it early. With proper treatment, your chances are excellent." "How much?" Sarah asked quietly. "How much will it cost?" The figure Dr. Miller quoted made her stomach drop. Even with insurance, the out-of-pocket expenses would be astronomical, money she didn't have. Later that morning, Sarah walked into Pine Grove Bank, hoping to refinance Sweet Haven. Mr. Peterson, her loan officer, shook his head before she even finished speaking. "I'm sorry, Sarah. You're already 3 months behind on payments. The bank is giving you 30 days to pay the full balance, or we'll have to foreclose." 30 days? That's impossible. This restaurant was my mother's life. It's all I have left of her. "Business is business," Mr. Peterson replied. "Unless you can find $150,000 in the next month, there's nothing I can do." Sarah left the bank, her head spinning. Outside, a sleek black car pulled up. Marcus Bennett, the local real estate developer, stepped out. Sarah, just the person I wanted to see. His smile was too wide, too practiced. Have you reconsidered my offer on the property? Sweet Haven isn't for sale, Marcus. Everything's for sale at the right price. My offer still stands, $300,000 cash. Think about it. That's double what you owe the bank. Sarah walked away without responding. The money would cover her medical bills and the bank debt, with plenty left over. But selling would mean betraying her mother's legacy. That evening, she met Dr. Michael Preston, her assigned oncologist. Unlike the other doctors, he took time to really talk with her. Cancer treatment is a marathon, not a sprint, he said kindly. You'll need a support system. Do you have family nearby? Sarah shook her head. Just the restaurant. My staff is like family, but I can't burden them with this. It was nearly midnight when Sarah finally headed to Sweet Haven's back entrance. The day's problems weighed heavily on her mind. She noticed movement in the shadows. A woman and a small boy were huddled by the dumpster. The boy's breathing was labored, making a frightening wheezing sound. He needs his inhaler, the woman was saying, digging through a worn backpack. Tommy, honey, try to stay calm. Is he okay? Sarah asked, startling them both. His asthma, the woman explained quickly. The cold makes it worse. Sarah recognized the desperation in the woman's eyes. Bring him inside where it's warm. Once in the restaurant's office, the boy's breathing slowly improved. The woman introduced herself as Grace Henderson, and her son as Tommy. We've been walking all day, Grace explained. Every shelter is full. Before Sarah could respond, an envelope slid under the office door. Inside was a single typed note. I know what you're hiding. Everyone will know soon. Sarah's hands shook as she read it. Was someone threatening to expose her illness? Or was there something else? Looking at Grace and Tommy, Sarah made a decision that would change all their lives. The apartment above the restaurant is empty, she heard herself saying. You can stay there, just until you find something else. Why would you help us? Grace asked suspiciously. You don't know anything about us. Sarah thought about her own desperate situation, the cancer, the bank, Marcus Bennett's offer. Sometimes when everything is falling apart, the only thing left to do is trust. Maybe we can help each other. She said quietly, not knowing just how true those words would prove to be. Sarah arrived early at Sweet Haven, hoping to catch up on paperwork. Instead, she found the kitchen in chaos. Containers of spoiled food sat on the counter, and the walk-in refrigerator door was wide open. Someone turned off the power last night. Lisa, the assistant chef, reported. Everything's ruined. Sarah checked the circuit breaker. The switch had been deliberately flipped. This wasn't an accident. Who was here last night? Sarah asked. Just me, closing up, Lisa answered, texting on her phone. Everything was fine when I left. Sarah noticed Lisa seemed more interested in her phone than the crisis at hand. Something felt off about her assistant's behavior lately. As they cleaned up the mess, Tommy wandered into the kitchen. The boy had a natural curiosity about cooking that Sarah couldn't help but notice. Can I help? He asked, watching them work. It's not safe for children in the kitchen, Lisa snapped. But Tommy was already examining the ruined ingredients with a chef's eye. Mom could make something with these. She always says nothing should go to waste. Before Sarah could respond, Dr. Michael Preston walked in through the back door. He'd started coming by regularly, claiming Sweet Haven had the best coffee in town. Everything okay? He asked, noticing the tension. I saw your lights on early. Just a small setback. Sarah said, trying to hide her worry. The lost inventory would cost thousands they couldn't afford. Outside, a man in an expensive suit stood watching the restaurant. Sarah didn't recognize him, but Tommy did. The boy ducked behind a counter, suddenly pale. That's my dad, he whispered to Sarah. Please don't let him see me. The man, James Henderson, left before Sarah could confront him, but his presence clearly terrified both Tommy and Grace. Later that morning, Sarah overheard Lisa on her phone in the alley. Yes, it's done. No, they don't suspect anything. I'll keep you posted. Sarah's suspicions grew, but she had bigger problems. The local food critic, William Morrison, had just made a reservation for that evening. When Sarah told Grace about Morrison's visit, the color drained from her face. Morrison? William Morrison is coming here? You know him? Grace turned away. Let's just say we have history. That afternoon, Sarah noticed Tommy in the kitchen again. this time perfectly dicing vegetables alongside the prep cooks. His technique was remarkable for a child his age. "My mom taught me," he explained proudly. "Before everything went bad, she was the best chef in." "Tommy," Grace interrupted sharply. "That's enough." Sarah watched Grace guide her son's hands, correcting his knife grip with professional precision. There was definitely more to their story than they were telling. That evening, just before Morrison was due to arrive, Sarah found another threatening note. "What would your customers think if they knew who you're harboring?" A cold fear gripped her. Someone knew about Grace and Tommy. But who? And why were they trying to sabotage her restaurant? Sarah looked at Grace, who was anxiously watching the door for Morrison's arrival. The woman clearly had secrets, dangerous ones, but so did Sarah, and time was running out for both of them. "I know you're not telling me everything," Sarah said quietly to Grace, "but right now, we need to get through this review. Sweet Haven's future depends on it." What Sarah didn't say was that her own future, her very survival, might depend on it too. Tommy was exploring the restaurant's storage room when he found the old photograph. It showed a younger version of Sarah's mother standing next to a distinguished-looking chef. The inscription read, "To Elizabeth, your friendship means everything. Love, Jean-Pierre." "Mom," Tommy called out, running to find Grace. "Look what I found." Grace's hands trembled as she took the photo. "Jean-Pierre," she whispered, "I never knew he had a connection to this place." Sarah walked in, saw the photo, and froze. "Where did you find that?" Before anyone could answer, James Henderson strode through the front door. Tommy immediately hid behind Grace. Well, James said, looking around. "So this is where you've been hiding?" "We're closed," Sarah announced firmly. James ignored her, focusing on Grace. "You think you can just disappear with my son, start a new life? Should I tell everyone here the truth about who you really are?" "Leave her alone," Tommy shouted, but Grace quieted him. "Your truth is a lie, James," Grace said, "and you know it." "We'll see about that." James smiled coldly. "I wonder what the health department would think about a homeless woman living above a restaurant, or what your customers would say if they knew about your history." After James left, Sarah went to the office to process what had happened. In the desk drawer, she found a prescription bottle with Grace's name on it. The label was for a powerful pain medication, the kind often abused by addicts. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Health inspection tomorrow, 9 a.m. Sarah rushed to tell Grace about the inspection, only to overhear Lisa speaking quietly on her phone in the alley again. "Yes, Mr. Henderson. No, they don't suspect me at all. Yes, I'll make sure everything is ready for tomorrow's inspection." Inside, Tommy was in the kitchen, expertly preparing a sauce Sarah had never seen before. "It's one of my mom's special recipes," he explained, "from when she worked with—" "Tommy," Grace cut him off. "That's enough." Dr. Preston arrived for his usual coffee, immediately noticing the tension. "Everything okay?" Before Sarah could answer, she felt a wave of dizziness, a side effect of her hidden illness. She grabbed the counter for support. "Sarah?" Dr. Preston moved quickly to help her. "When was your last treatment?" Tommy's eyes widened. "Treatment? Are you sick?" "I'm fine," Sarah insisted, but no one believed her. Grace pulled Tommy aside, but not before he saw Sarah's hospital bracelet, the one she'd forgotten to remove. Later that evening, William Morrison's review appeared online. The headline made everyone gasp, "Sweet Haven's New Direction. A familiar touch?" The review read, "Last night's dinner revealed flavors reminiscent of the legendary Jean-Pierre's signature dishes." Could there be a connection? And why did the kitchen staff include someone who looked remarkably like disgraced chef Grace Henderson? Sarah confronted Grace with the review. "Who are you really? And what's your connection to Jean-Pierre?" Before Grace could answer, they discovered Jean-Pierre's famous cookbook was missing from the office. "No," Grace whispered. "He'll destroy everything if he has that book." "Who?" Sarah demanded. "James," Grace said. "He's not just here for Tommy. He's here to destroy the one thing that could prove my innocence and expose his guilt." The sound of sirens interrupted them. 2 police cars pulled up outside, and James Henderson stepped out with a smug smile. "Time's up, Grace," he called out. "Let's see how your new friend feels about harboring a fugitive." The police officers entered Sweet Haven as James Henderson watched with a satisfied smirk. But instead of arresting Grace, they handed her a document. Restraining order against James Henderson, the officer explained. Called in by Dr. Preston. He provided evidence of harassment. James's face darkened. "This isn't over," he threatened before leaving. Later that night, Sarah found a folder hidden in her office. Inside were newspaper clippings about Grace. Rising star chef accused of embezzlement. Henderson restaurant empire claims millions missing. Chef Grace Henderson disappears before trial. Across town at the Golden Fork, Sweet Haven's main competitor, a campaign was brewing. Can you trust a restaurant that harbors criminals? Their new billboard read, with Grace's old mugshot prominently displayed. "Mom?" Tommy's voice startled Sarah. He stood in her office doorway, holding her medical records that had fallen from her purse. "Are you dying like Grandma did?" Sarah's heart sank. "No, Tommy, I'm sick, but I'm fighting it." "Is that why you're selling the restaurant?" he asked. "How did you know about that?" "I heard Mr. Bennett talking to Lisa. He said once you sign the papers, everything changes." Sarah confronted Lisa, who finally broke down. James Henderson and Marcus Bennett are partners. They've been planning this for months. They want the whole block for their new development. Grace overheard and stepped forward. "I need to tell you the truth, Sarah. All of it." She revealed how James, her ex-husband, had set her up. He'd stolen millions from their restaurants, framed her for the theft, and threatened to take Tommy if she didn't take the blame. Jean-Pierre knew the truth, Grace explained. He was gathering evidence against James when he died. Suddenly, they discovered the restaurant's back door open. Jean-Pierre's cookbook was gone. Sarah felt another wave of dizziness. The room spun, and she collapsed. "Call an ambulance," Grace shouted. At the hospital, Dr. Preston examined Sarah. "The cancer is advancing faster than we expected. You need to start aggressive treatment immediately." William Morrison appeared in the doorway. "I thought I'd find you here," he said to Grace. "We need to talk about Jean-Pierre." Before he could continue, Tommy burst in. "Mom, I know where the book is. Lisa took it to Mr. Henderson." "The book doesn't matter anymore," Grace said, looking at Sarah in the hospital bed. "What matters is saving this restaurant. It's the only thing keeping Sarah fighting." Morrison stepped closer. "Actually, that's why I'm here. I know what really happened 5 years ago. I have proof that James Henderson stole that money." "Why didn't you come forward before?" Grace demanded. Morrison looked ashamed. "Because I was paid not to. But seeing you here, seeing what Sarah's built, what you're trying to protect, I can't stay quiet anymore." Sarah tried to sit up. "Then help us expose him." "It's not that simple," Morrison replied. "James Henderson owns half the town. One wrong move, and he'll destroy everything." "He already is," Grace said. "Look what he's done to Sarah's restaurant, to my life, to his own son." Tommy, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke up. "The book has proof too. That's why Dad wants it so badly. There's something hidden in it." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "I saw Jean-Pierre give it to Mom the night he died. He said something about evidence in plain sight." Before anyone could respond, a nurse rushed in. "Dr. Preston, you need to see these test results." As the doctor left with the nurse, Sarah grabbed Grace's hand. "Whatever's in that book, we need to get it back. Not just for you, but for all of us." "But how?" Grace asked. "James has it now." Sarah smiled weakly. "Then we'll just have to take it back, and I know exactly how to do it." In Sarah's hospital room, Grace finally revealed the full story. "Jean-Pierre wasn't just my mentor. He was investigating James for years. He discovered James was using our restaurants to launder money from Marcus Bennett's real estate schemes. That's why they want Sweet Haven," Sarah realized. "It's not about the property. It's about having a legitimate business front." "The night Jean-Pierre died," Grace continued, "he gave me his cookbook. He said everything we needed was hidden in his recipes. But before I could find anything, James had me arrested." Morrison stepped forward. "I can confirm this. Jean-Pierre contacted me the day before he died. He had proof of everything, the money laundering, the fraud, even proof that James was embezzling from his own restaurants." "And that proof is in the cookbook?" Sarah asked. "Has to be," Morrison nodded. "Jean-Pierre was old school. He didn't trust computers. He kept everything in that book." Tommy, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke up. "I remember something. The night Mr. Pierre gave Mom the book, he said something about reading between the lines, and the truth is in the measurements. Dr. Preston returned with Sarah's test results. "This is unexpected," he said. "Sarah, your latest scans show the cancer has spread more aggressively than we thought. We need to start treatment immediately." "No," Sarah said firmly. "Not until we deal with this." "Sarah, you can't wait," Dr. Preston insisted. "I won't die knowing James Henderson will destroy everything I've built," Sarah replied. "Everything my mother built." Lisa appeared in the doorway, looking guilty. "I can help," she said. "I know where James keeps the book, and I know when he'll be away from his office." "Why should we trust you?" Grace demanded. "Because I found proof of what he's really doing." Lisa pulled out her phone, showing photos of documents. "He's not just planning to destroy Sweet Haven. He's going to destroy the whole neighborhood, everyone's homes, their businesses, all of it." Dr. Preston studied the documents. "These construction permits, they're for the entire historic district. They're planning to level everything. That's why they need Sweet Haven," Sarah realized. "It's the cornerstone property. Without it, they can't proceed with demolition." "There's more," Lisa added. "James has a meeting tomorrow with his investors. The book will be in his office safe. I have the combination." "It's a trap," Grace warned. "No," Tommy said suddenly. "She's telling the truth. I saw the papers on Dad's desk when he made me visit last week. He's going to destroy everything." Sarah tried to stand but stumbled. Dr. Preston caught her. "You're not going anywhere in this condition." "Then I'll go," Grace said. "It's my fight anyway." "Our fight?" Sarah corrected. "This isn't just about clearing your name anymore. It's about saving everyone's homes and businesses." Morrison stepped forward. "I'll help. I owe it to Jean-Pierre, and to both of you." "Tomorrow then," Grace decided. "While James is meeting his investors, we get the book." "And then what?" Lisa asked. "Then we expose everything," Sarah said. "At the community meeting tomorrow night. Everyone will be there, including James and Marcus Bennett." "You're not strong enough," Dr. Preston protested. "I'm strong enough for this," Sarah insisted. "Some things are worth dying for." "No one's dying," Grace said firmly. "We're going to save your restaurant, expose James, and then you're going to fight this cancer and win." Tommy hugged Sarah. "Promise you won't give up?" Sarah held him tight, remembering her own mother's battle with cancer. "I promise, Tommy. We're all in this together now." As they planned their next moves, none of them noticed James Henderson standing in the hallway, listening to everything. He pulled out his phone. "Change of plans," he said quietly. "Move everything up. We do it tonight." James Henderson and Marcus Bennett sat in their darkened office, reviewing their plans. "The community won't support demolition," Marcus warned. "We need to discredit Sarah and Grace before they can expose anything." "Already handled," James smiled. "I've arranged a special delivery to Sweet Haven tonight. By morning, the health department will have an anonymous tip about drug activity on the premises." "What about the book?" "We find it first. Lisa says they're planning to break in tomorrow, but they'll be too late." Across town, Tommy sat alone in Sweet Haven's kitchen, studying Jean-Pierre's recipes that he'd memorized from the book. Something about the measurements bothered him. "These don't make sense," he muttered, writing them down. No chef would use these proportions. Grace found him there, fighting her own battle. Her hands shook slightly, withdrawal symptoms she thought she'd conquered years ago. James knew her weakness. He'd made sure a bottle of pills was delivered to her door that morning. "Mom," Tommy said suddenly, "look at these numbers. They're not measurements, they're dates and amounts." Grace looked at Tommy's notes. The recipes, measurements were actually records of transactions, dates, dollar amounts, account numbers. Jean-Pierre hid everything in plain sight, Grace realized. Every recipe tells a story of James's crimes. At the hospital, Sarah received unexpected news from Dr. Preston. "Your latest blood work shows something strange," he said. "The cancer markers, they're not what we thought." "What does that mean?" "It means we need to run more tests. Something's not adding up." Morrison arrived, interrupting them. "We have a problem. James is moving everything tonight. He's having the book transferred to an offshore location." "How do you know this?" Sarah demanded. "Because he just offered me $1 million to write a story destroying Grace's reputation. He's tying up loose ends." Sarah tried calling Grace, but the phones were dead. The power at Sweet Haven had been cut. At the restaurant, Grace and Tommy heard vehicles pulling up outside. "Dad's men," Tommy whispered. "They're here for the book." "They don't know we've already figured out the code," Grace said. "Quick, write down everything you remember from those recipes." Tommy worked frantically, translating measurements into dates and numbers. A noise downstairs made them freeze. Well, James's voice carried up the stairs. "I thought I'd find you here." Grace pushed Tommy toward the back exit. "Run to Sarah. Tell her what we found." "Mom, no. I'll hold them off." "Go." Tommy slipped out just as James reached the top of the stairs. He held up the cookbook. "Looking for this," he smirked. "Too bad you never understood what Jean-Pierre was trying to tell you." "Actually," Grace stood her ground, "I understand perfectly. Each recipe is a record, isn't it? Every measurement, every ingredient, they tell the story of your crimes." James's smile faltered. "Prove it." October 15th, $2 million transferred to account number 84792. That's the sugar measurement in Jean-Pierre's crème brûlée recipe. "You're smarter than I thought." James stepped closer. "Too bad no one will believe a drug addict." He tossed the pill bottle at her feet. "How long before you give in? You always were weak." Grace kicked the bottle away. "I'm not that person anymore." "No?" James nodded to his men. "Search the place. Find the boy." "He's gone," Grace said, "and he has everything we need." "Nobody's going to believe a child. They'll believe the evidence. Every dirty transaction, every bribe, every threat. It's all there in Tommy's memory. And he's headed straight to the police." For the first time, fear flickered across James's face. "Find the boy," he shouted to his men. "Now." But Tommy was already racing through the dark streets, Jean-Pierre's secret code locked safely in his mind, running to save not just his mother, but everything and everyone they'd come to love. Tommy ran through the rain, James's men close behind. He clutched his notes, the decoded recipes that could expose everything. Reaching the hospital, he collided with Dr. Preston in the lobby. "They've got Mom," Tommy gasped. "At Sweet Haven." Sarah, despite her weakness, was already putting on her coat. "Call the police." "No police," Morrison interrupted, rushing in. "James has half the force in his pocket. We need the evidence first." "Show them what you found, Tommy," Dr. Preston urged. Tommy spread his notes on Sarah's hospital bed. The decoded recipes revealed years of transactions, money laundering, bribes, properties seized through fraud. "Look at these dates," Morrison pointed. "They match every major property acquisition in the historic district. James and Bennett have been planning this for years." Sarah's phone rang. It was the bank. "Final notice," Mr. Peterson said. "The deadline's moved up. We need full payment by noon tomorrow." "That's impossible." "Mr. Bennett's orders. He just bought your mortgage." Before Sarah could respond, she doubled over in pain. Dr. Preston rushed to help. "Your latest test results," he said quietly. "They're showing irregularities. The treatment you've been receiving, something's wrong." "What do you mean?" "These aren't normal cancer markers. I need to run more tests, but I think—" He was interrupted by Tommy's shout. "They're here!" James's men had followed Tommy to the hospital. They moved through the lobby, trying to look casual. "The back exit," Dr. Preston guided them. "Through the pharmacy." In the pharmacy, Sarah stumbled. Her vision blurred, her heart racing unnaturally. "It's not cancer," Dr. Preston realized suddenly. "You're being poisoned. Your symptoms, the irregular tests, someone's been tampering with your medication." "Lisa," Sarah whispered. "She's been bringing my prescriptions." Morrison checked his phone. "James just announced an emergency meeting at City Hall. He's pushing through the demolition permits tonight." "We need to stop him," Sarah insisted. "You need medical attention," Dr. Preston argued. "What I need is to save my restaurant and stop James from destroying more lives." Tommy, who had been quiet, spoke up. "I can prove everything. I memorized all of Jean-Pierre's recipes. Every number, every date." "It's not enough," Morrison said. "We need the actual book. James's signature, proof of his involvement." "Mom has it," Tommy said. "She got it back when Dad came to Sweet Haven. She switched it when he wasn't looking." "But Grace is still there," Sarah realized, "with James." At Sweet Haven, Grace faced her ex-husband. The real cookbook was hidden in Tommy's secret spot in the kitchen, while James held the fake she'd planted. "You really think you can stop this?" James taunted. "By morning, this whole block will be demolished. Accidents happen in condemned buildings." "That's your plan?" Burn it all down for the insurance? Bennett's already arranged everything. Gas leak, faulty wiring, tragic, but these old buildings are so dangerous. Grace glanced at her phone. Tommy's text. We're coming. Keep him talking. You killed Jean-Pierre the same way, Grace said. Made it look like an accident. Prove it. James moved closer. Oh wait, you can't. The only proof was in his cookbook, and I have that. Do you? Grace smiled. Check the measurements, James. They don't quite add up, do they? James opened the book, finally noticing the recipes were wrong. Where's the real book? Safe. Like Tommy is. He's already shown the evidence to Morrison. James's phone buzzed. His men had lost Tommy at the hospital. It doesn't matter, James snarled. No one will believe a washed-up chef and her brat. They'll believe this, Morrison said from the doorway. He held up his phone, recording everything. Behind him stood Sarah, Dr. Preston, Tommy, and several FBI agents. We've been investigating Bennett's development deals for months, an agent said. We just needed proof of the connection. James lunged for the back door but stopped short. Grace stood there, holding the real cookbook. It's over, James, she said. Jean-Pierre made sure of that. The community hall buzzed with tension. James Henderson, despite being cornered at Sweet Haven, had managed to slip away in the confusion. Now he stood at the podium, preparing to address the packed room about the revitalization project. Sarah, Grace, and Tommy sat in the back, waiting. Dr. Preston had insisted on coming, monitoring Sarah's condition closely as her system cleared the poison Lisa had been slipping her. Ladies and gentlemen, James began smoothly. Tonight we vote on the future of our historic district. Bennett Development promises new jobs, modern facilities. And how many families will lose their homes? Grace stood up. How many businesses will you destroy? Security, James called out. Remove this woman. Not so fast, Morrison stepped forward. Everyone needs to hear this. He connected his phone to the hall's video system. James's confession at Sweet Haven played clearly, his words about burning buildings for insurance echoing through the speakers. That video is fake, James declared. This woman is trying to destroy a legitimate business deal because of a personal vendetta. Really? Morrison pulled out Jean-Pierre's cookbook. Then explain these records. Every transaction, every bribe, every property seized through fraud, it's all here. Tommy stepped forward next, reciting from memory. October 12th, $2 million transferred to offshore account 84792. November 3rd, payment to building inspector Davis, $50,000. The inspector, sitting in the front row, stood up shakily. It's true, I was paid to falsify reports. James's face darkened. You have no proof these numbers mean anything. But I do, Morrison said. Jean-Pierre sent me copies of everything before he died. I was just too afraid to come forward. Until now. Sarah tried to stand but stumbled. Dr. Preston caught her as she collapsed. The poison's still in her system, he announced to the shocked crowd. Lisa confirmed she was paid to tamper with Sarah's medication, make her too sick to fight the takeover. The room erupted in outrage. James backed toward the door, but FBI agents blocked his path. James Henderson, the lead agent announced, you're under arrest for conspiracy, attempted murder, fraud. You can't prove anything, James shouted. Actually, Grace opened the cookbook to its final page. Jean-Pierre left one last piece of evidence. She pulled out a micro SD card hidden in the book's spine. Everything's here. Security footage from your office, banking records, even emails about Jean-Pierre's murder. Dad? Tommy's voice cut through the chaos. Why? Why did you have to hurt so many people? For the first time, James seemed to falter. He looked at his son, then at Grace, then at the community he'd tried to destroy. Because he could. Marcus Bennett spoke from the doorway. Because people like us take what we want, and none of you can stop us. That's where you're wrong, Sarah said, forcing herself to stand. This community is stronger than your greed. Bennett laughed. Community? Look around. These buildings are falling apart. These businesses are failing. We're doing you a favor. Sweet Haven isn't failing, Grace declared, and neither is this community. She nodded to Tommy, who wheeled in a cart of food, dishes he and Grace had prepared using Jean-Pierre's recipes. Tonight, Grace announced, Sweet Haven launches its new menu, a fusion of Jean-Pierre's classics and new innovations, in honor of a man who believed in preserving not just recipes, but communities. The aroma filled the hall. People began sampling the food, exclaiming over the flavors. "This is what you wanted to destroy," Morrison told James and Bennett. "Not just buildings, but heritage, tradition, family." FBI agents led James away in handcuffs. Bennett was arrested next, protesting his innocence. Sarah swayed again, but this time the whole community moved to support her. "I need to get you back to the hospital," Dr. Preston insisted. "Not yet," Sarah smiled weakly. "First, we need to vote." The community council called for order. The vote was unanimous. The historic district would be preserved. Sweet Haven would stay. As the celebration began, Tommy hugged his mother. "Is it really over?" Grace held him tight. "A new beginning," she corrected, "for all of us." Sarah watched them, feeling strength return as her system fought off the poison. She had a long recovery ahead, but looking at her restored community, her family, she knew she would survive. The night ended with an impromptu feast at Sweet Haven. Tommy worked alongside Grace in the kitchen, their talents combined, creating something extraordinary. Just like Jean-Pierre had predicted. And somewhere, Sarah knew, her mother was smiling too. 2 weeks after James and Bennett's arrests, the truth about Sweet Haven emerged in ways no one expected. Morrison's investigative article hit the front page. Local restaurant uncovers $1 million crime ring. The story detailed everything: the money laundering, the forced property acquisitions, and Jean-Pierre's murder. The evidence was literally hidden in a cookbook, Morrison wrote, a legendary chef's final act of justice. At the courthouse, James Henderson pleaded guilty to all charges. The prosecutor read Jean-Pierre's final notes, found in the cookbook's hidden compartment. "I know James will kill me for what I've discovered," Jean-Pierre had written. "But Grace will understand the code. She always understood food was about more than recipes. It was about truth." The judge's sentence was severe: 20 years for fraud, conspiracy, and Jean-Pierre's murder. Marcus Bennett received 15 years for his role. At Sweet Haven, Sarah sat with Dr. Preston, reviewing her latest test results. "The poison's completely out of your system," he explained. "And the best news, there never was any cancer. The symptoms were all caused by the toxins Lisa was adding to your food." "I can't believe she worked for James all along," Sarah said. "She's cooperating with the FBI now. Apparently, James had leverage on her too. He controlled a lot of people through fear and blackmail." Grace entered with more news. The FBI had seized James and Bennett's assets. "They're returning all the stolen properties," she announced, "and compensating the families they drove out of business." Tommy burst in next, waving a letter. "Mom, Mr. Morrison wants me to be a guest judge on Junior Chef Challenge." "The TV show?" Sarah asked. "They saw the story about how I memorized all of Jean-Pierre's recipes. They say I'm the youngest person ever to decode a culinary cipher." Grace hugged her son, tears in her eyes. "Jean-Pierre would be so proud of you." Sarah watched them, remembering how close they'd all come to losing everything. "We should do something special," she said, "to thank the community for standing with us." "Actually," Morrison said from the doorway, "I have an idea about that." He explained that several major food publications wanted to feature Sweet Haven. Not just because of the scandal, but because of what you've built here. A fusion of Jean-Pierre's classics and Grace's innovations, with Tommy adding his own special touch. "We could do a community celebration," Grace suggested. "Use it to launch a program for aspiring young chefs." "Jean-Pierre always wanted to pass on his knowledge," Morrison agreed. "This would honor his legacy." Sarah's phone rang. It was the bank. After James's conviction, all his fraudulent dealings were being reversed. Sweet Haven's mortgage was cleared. "The property's yours, free and clear," Mr. Peterson said, "and the bank wants to offer you a business expansion loan if you're interested." Dr. Preston squeezed Sarah's hand. "Sounds like things are looking up." "More than looking up," Grace said. "We're finally home." That evening, as Tommy practiced in the kitchen and Dr. Preston helped Sarah plan the community celebration, Grace found Morrison sitting alone at the bar. "Why did you really help us?" she asked. "The truth this time." Morrison sighed. "I was there the night Jean-Pierre died. I saw James leave his house, but I was too afraid to come forward. I've carried that guilt for years. And now I can finally tell Jean-Pierre's full story, not just about his recipes, but about his courage. How he sacrificed everything to protect you, to expose the truth." Grace opened the cookbook to Jean-Pierre's last recipe. The measurements, when decoded, weren't about money or crimes. They were a message to her. Grace, you were always more than my student. You were the daughter I never had. The truth will set you free. Love, JP. At the host stand, Tommy was already taking reservations for the community celebration. Every call ended the same way. Welcome to Sweet Haven, where every recipe tells a story. Sarah watched it all from her office, Dr. Preston by her side. I never thought we'd get here, she said. Where? He asked. Home, she smiled. All of us, together. Outside, the historic district buzzed with renewed life. The buildings James and Bennett had threatened were being restored. New businesses were opening, families were returning, and at the heart of it all, Sweet Haven stood as a testament to the power of truth, justice, and the unbreakable bonds of chosen family. That night, after closing, Grace found Tommy adding his own recipe to Jean-Pierre's book. What are you calling it? She asked. Tommy smiled. Second chances, because that's what Sweet Haven gave us. No, Grace corrected, hugging him. That's what we gave each other. 3 months after James Henderson's conviction, Sweet Haven had become the heart of a revitalized community. The Young Chefs program, started by Grace and Tommy, now had 30 students enrolled, learning everything from basic knife skills to advanced culinary techniques. Today's lesson is about more than cooking, Grace told her students. It's about building confidence, finding your voice through food. Tommy, now the program's junior instructor, helped a younger student perfect her knife grip. That's exactly how Jean-Pierre taught my mom, he explained. And now we're passing it on. Sarah, fully recovered and healthier than ever, managed the business side with renewed energy. Dr. Preston had become a constant presence, both professionally and personally. The restaurant's profits have tripled since we launched the new menu, Sarah announced during their morning meeting. We're even getting reservation requests from out of state. Morrison, who'd become their unofficial chronicler, was working on a book about Sweet Haven's story. It's not just about the food anymore, he explained. It's about community, redemption, justice. The FBI's investigation had revealed the full scope of James and Bennett's crimes. Dozens of families were receiving compensation. Their properties returned. Many chose to reinvest in the historic district, opening new businesses alongside Sweet Haven. Grace received an unexpected letter from the Culinary Institute that had stripped her credentials after her arrest. In light of recent events, she read aloud, we wish to formally reinstate your certification and offer our deepest apologies. Are you going to accept? Sarah asked. I already have something better, Grace replied, watching Tommy teach. But it's nice to have my name cleared. The cooking show that had invited Tommy as a guest judge now wanted him as a regular contributor. Young Chef's Corner with Tommy Henderson would film segments right in Sweet Haven's kitchen. Just promise you won't forget about us when you're famous, Sarah teased. Never, Tommy said seriously. Sweet Haven is home. Dr. Preston had news of his own. The hospital was partnering with Sweet Haven to launch a nutrition program for patients. Food is medicine, he explained, using Grace's recipes to help people heal. Jean-Pierre always said food could heal more than hunger, Grace remembered. The community council voted to designate the historic district as a protected cultural site. Sweet Haven would be listed as a landmark, ensuring it could never be threatened by developers again. Your mother would be proud, Morrison told Sarah. She and Jean-Pierre started something amazing here. We're just continuing their legacy, Sarah replied. One evening, after closing, Grace found an old photo album in Jean-Pierre's cookbook. Inside were pictures of him teaching a young Grace, their joy evident in every shot. I miss him, Tommy said, looking at the photos. He's still here, Grace assured him. In every recipe we cook, every student we teach. Sarah organized a special dinner to celebrate the Young Chefs program's success. The students prepared a 7-course meal, each dish telling part of Sweet Haven's story. This is what Jean-Pierre fought to protect, Morrison said in his speech. Not just recipes or buildings, but the next generation of culinary artists. The local newspaper ran a feature, Sweet Haven, How a Small Restaurant Saved a Community. The article detailed not just the scandal and its resolution, but the healing that followed. Dr. Preston found Sarah in her office, reviewing applications for the program's scholarship fund. You've built something remarkable here, he said. We all did, she corrected. Together. Grace watched her son demonstrate Jean-Pierre's famous sauce technique to his students. His confidence, his passion for teaching, he was carrying forward not just recipes, but values. The evening ended with Tommy presenting his newest recipe to the group. He'd named it Legacy, a perfect fusion of Jean-Pierre's classical technique and his own innovative touch. Food tells stories, he explained to his students, about where we come from, who we are, what we can become. Sarah looked around at their expanded family, Grace and Tommy, Dr. Preston, Morrison, their students and staff. Sweet Haven had become more than a restaurant. It was a sanctuary, a school, a home. To new beginnings, Grace raised her glass. And old friends, Sarah added, thinking of her mother and Jean-Pierre. Outside, the historic district glowed with renewed life. Where James and Bennett had seen only profit potential, a community had found its soul again. And at its heart, Sweet Haven continued to serve not just meals, but hope, healing, and the promise that second chances were always possible. Tommy added one final note to Jean-Pierre's cookbook. Some recipes feed the body, the best ones feed the soul. The sun rose gently over Sweet Haven, casting its golden light on the restaurant's freshly painted sign. It was a new beginning, a day they had all anticipated for months. Today marked the official reopening of Sweet Haven, and the entire community seemed to pulse with excitement, drawn by the promise of good food, warm company, and the spirit of resilience that had saved their beloved historic district. Inside, Sarah adjusted her apron, gazing around the bustling kitchen with a satisfied smile. Grace was instructing her students, moving with the calm confidence of someone who had come through the storm stronger than ever. And Tommy? Well, Tommy was the star of the show today. Just a few days prior, he had won first place in the prestigious Junior Chef Challenge, beating out competitors several years his senior. He wore his winner's sash proudly, adding a touch of youthful joy to the kitchen. The morning was a flurry of activity, but it was also filled with laughter and lightness that felt rare and precious. At one point, Tommy ran over to Sarah, excitedly tugging on her sleeve. "Sarah, did you see the banner?" he asked, practically bouncing on his toes. "It says, Home of the Junior Chef Champion. Can you believe it?" Sarah chuckled, ruffling his hair. "You earned every bit of it, Tommy. You make this place proud. We all do." Tommy beamed before hurrying off to help Grace with the final touches. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling a sense of fulfillment that went beyond words. Sweet Haven wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was a place of healing, a symbol of second chances, and a haven for everyone who had been a part of its story. The festivities kicked off at noon, with the dining room packed to the brim. The aromas of Grace's and Tommy's carefully crafted menu filled the air, a blend of Jean-Pierre's classic recipes and new creations that celebrated Sweet Haven's rebirth. Every table was filled, not just with food, but with laughter and the warmth of shared memories. It seemed like everyone in town had gathered to celebrate, from longtime patrons to new faces drawn by the restaurant's recent fame. Dr. Preston arrived mid-afternoon, greeting Sarah with a warm embrace. He had been a steady presence in her life these past months, supporting her not only as a doctor, but as a friend. Today, he brought news that made her heart skip. "Sarah," he said quietly, his expression brimming with joy. "The latest results came in yesterday. I wanted to wait until today to tell you." He handed her an envelope, and though she knew what it contained, the confirmation made her eyes well up with tears. "Remission," he said softly, just as she opened it. "You're clear, Sarah. It's over." The weight of the word hit her all at once, and she hugged him tightly, tears spilling down her cheeks. For the first time in months, she felt truly free. This wasn't just the end of a long battle, it was the start of a new life. As the sun set, the festivities continued into the evening. The restaurant was packed with people from every corner of town, and Grace was in her element, greeting guests and sharing stories. She had long since shed the weight of her past, and her name, once tarnished by scandal, had been restored with a radiance no one could deny. She was respected, celebrated even, not just as a chef, but as a mentor and a friend. After a while, Sarah noticed Tommy standing in the corner of the dining room, gazing up at a new framed photo on the wall. It was a tribute to Jean-Pierre with a small plaque underneath that read, "In memory of Chef Jean-Pierre, beloved mentor, loyal friend, unbreakable spirit. Grace joined her son, placing a hand on his shoulder. "He would have loved to see you here, Tommy," she said softly. "Cooking, teaching, creating, carrying on his legacy." Tommy looked up at his mother, eyes bright with pride. "And you too, Mom. You're his legacy too." The two of them shared a quiet moment, their bond stronger than ever. They had been through so much, but they had emerged with a sense of purpose that gave them strength beyond measure. Tommy was growing up, and Grace could see so much of Jean-Pierre's spirit in him. His curiosity, his passion for food, and his unyielding drive to make a difference. Across the room, Sarah raised her glass, calling for everyone's attention. As the crowd fell silent, she took a moment to soak it all in. The faces of friends, family, and community members who had supported Sweet Haven through its darkest days. "To Sweet Haven," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "And to each and every one of you who believed in us, even when things seemed impossible. Thank you for standing by us, for fighting for this community, and for helping us keep the dream alive." She paused, her gaze drifting to Grace and Tommy, who stood arm in arm, their faces glowing with pride. This place isn't just a restaurant, it's a home, and it's a testament to the power of second chances, of redemption, and of family. The family we're born into, and the family we choose. So here's to all of you. May we continue to grow, to love, and to support each other, no matter what comes next. A cheer erupted from the crowd, and the sound of clinking glasses filled the room. In that moment, Sarah felt as if they were all part of something much larger than themselves, a legacy that would endure for generations to come. 1 year later. A flash forward showed Sweet Haven bustling on an ordinary Saturday. The restaurant had become a fixture in the community, a place where people came not just to eat, but to connect, to find comfort, and to celebrate life's milestones. Grace's Young Chefs program had flourished, with more than 50 students now enrolled. The program offered scholarships and mentorship, creating opportunities for young talent in the community. Tommy, now a junior instructor, had even developed his own line of signature sauces, which sold out at the local market every weekend. The impact of Sweet Haven had extended far beyond its walls. Local businesses had joined in the revitalization of the historic district, inspired by the resilience and success of the restaurant. Shops, cafes, and galleries had sprung up, bringing new life to the area. The community was thriving, and Sweet Haven was at the heart of it all. Sarah was happier than she'd ever been, her health fully restored. She had even taken up a role in town leadership, helping to protect the district and ensure it remained a place where family-owned businesses could thrive. Her mother's dream was alive and well, and Sarah knew that she had found her calling, not just as a restaurateur, but as a guardian of the community's heritage. Final reflections. One quiet evening, after the last guests had left, Sarah, Grace, Tommy, and Dr. Preston gathered in the kitchen, sharing a late-night meal. The restaurant was dimly lit, and the atmosphere was peaceful, filled with the warm scent of herbs and spices that seemed to embody the essence of Sweet Haven. "Do you think Jean-Pierre would be proud of us?" Tommy asked, his voice soft but full of hope. Sarah reached out, taking his hand. "I think he would be proud of all of us," she said. "Of the way we fought, of the way we came together, and of the way we refused to give up." Grace smiled, her eyes misty with emotion. "We've all been given a second chance," she said, looking around the table. "And I think it's because Jean-Pierre believed in us, even when we didn't believe in ourselves." They raised their glasses in a final toast, a quiet, unspoken promise to honor the legacy of Sweet Haven, not just as a restaurant, but as a place where lives were rebuilt, dreams were realized, and second chances were always possible. As they clinked their glasses, the clock struck midnight, signaling the start of a new day, the dawn of a new beginning. We hope this story touched your heart as much as it did ours. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, and share your thoughts in the comments, or let us know what you'd like to see next. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to keep following powerful stories like this one, because sometimes it's the second chances that save us.